The air inside the Senate Intelligence Committee chamber crackled with anticipation. Marble pillars towered on each side like silent sentinels. The gallery was packed, media, aides, and the who's who of Capitol Hill, all waiting to witness the much-publicized testimony of Kash Patel, the newly appointed director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, appointed by President Donald J. Trump just 6 months ago. Kash had wasted no time shaking things up. Whispers circulated like wildfire through the press. That he'd reopened sealed investigations into DC elites. That he'd pulled skeletons from closets long buried. And most recently, that he had uncovered damning communications between a sitting federal judge and high-level lobbyists involved in government contracting fraud. That judge? Judge Roland Myles, a Clinton-era holdover known for slick hair, a smoother tongue, and a trail of mysteriously closed cases that always seemed to benefit the political class. But no one expected Myles himself to preside over the testimony. Somehow, through procedural manipulation and a convenient substitution, he had secured a temporary assignment to the committee for the day, an obvious setup to trap and discredit Patel in front of the cameras. Kash knew it too. As he adjusted his tie and walked into the chamber, he scanned the room like a battlefield. Calm, strategic, dangerous. He spotted President Trump's chief of staff, a hulking figure in a navy suit, nodding from the back. Behind him, Caroline Leavitt, the president's press secretary, scribbled notes rapidly. The Trump administration knew what was at stake. This wasn't just another hearing. It was war. Director Patel, Judge Myles announced with a thin smile, tapping his gavel. We welcome you today for your insights into the recent operations of the FBI under your direction. And your, interpretation of justice. Myles' tone dripped with condescension. Cameras zoomed in. Kash took his seat, posture straight, eyes locked. Thank you, Your Honor. I'm here to report truthfully and without bias on matters that impact the security and integrity of this great nation. For a few minutes, things stayed civil, almost too civil. Then Myles launched his ambush. Let me read a portion of your internal memo from 2 weeks ago, Myles began, lifting a document with theatrical flair. You wrote, several federal officers, including members of the judiciary, have engaged in acts of high corruption, coercion, and obstruction of justice. Are you accusing this court of corruption, Mr. Patel? The room hushed. Reporters leaned forward. The trap had been set. Kash didn't blink. If the shoe fits, he replied smoothly, then I'm not afraid to name who's wearing it. A few gasps escaped from the back of the room. Myles' face hardened. You're on dangerous ground, Mr. Patel. So is anyone who thinks they're above the law, Kash returned. The judge narrowed his eyes. Do you have any evidence to support this accusation? Because I, for one, have nothing to hide. Kash's eyes flicked to a folder he'd brought with him, plain, manila, unassuming. He hadn't planned to open it here, not in this room, not yet. But Myles had changed the game. He placed the folder on the desk and opened it. Actually, I do. Inside were 63 pages of encrypted emails, financial records, and photographs. All of it linking Judge Roland Myles to a shell company based in the British Virgin Islands, one that received millions in kickbacks from government contracts awarded through Myles' closed-door rulings. The kicker? One email dated just 2 months ago, ensure Patel's reputation is destroyed before the FBI investigation hits my desk. Kash looked up slowly, voice steady. Would you like me to read the next part out loud? Judge Myles' hands trembled slightly. This is outrageous. But the damage was done. Journalists were already tweeting. Phones buzzed across the chamber. And outside, unseen by Myles, 2 U.S. Marshals began to walk toward the back entrance, just waiting for the signal. The room was no longer a courtroom, it was a powder keg. Tension gripped every face as Kash Patel stood, holding the damning file in one hand while calmly passing a copy to the committee clerk. This, Kash said, gesturing to the stack of documents, is only a fraction of what we've uncovered. Judge Myles' offshore transactions began in 2015 and escalated right around the time key government contracts were redirected to front companies. These companies, registered under proxies and associates connected to him, have siphoned over $120 million in taxpayer funds over the past 7 years. Judge Myles' composure slipped. His smile, once smug and secure, faded into a pale grimace. This is a witch hunt, he snapped, slamming his gavel. This entire hearing is out of order. You think your position makes you immune to consequences? But no one was listening to him anymore. Everyone's eyes were now locked on Patel. Even the senators on the panel. Many of them longtime skeptics of Trump's appointments looked stunned. Senator Martha Gentry, an independent known for her fierce opposition to federal overreach, leaned into her mic. Director Patel, have these documents been verified by the Bureau? They have, Senator Patel nodded. The financial transactions were cross-referenced by independent auditors under the Department of the Treasury's oversight. The emails were forensically authenticated. And as of this morning, the DOJ signed off on a sealed indictment. Judge Myles' mouth dropped open. You're lying, he said hoarsely. You wouldn't dare. Kash turned to the back of the chamber where two men in dark suits and badges were waiting quietly. Gentlemen, he said. The U.S. Marshals began walking down the aisle slowly, their footsteps echoing through the chamber. Reporters scrambled, phones out, broadcasting the unfolding scene to millions across the nation. This can't be happening, someone muttered. Myles backed up in his chair, his gavel clattering to the floor. You can't arrest me. I'm a sitting federal judge, he shouted. Correction, Kash said, you were a judge. You've just been suspended by the Chief Justice pending federal indictment. The marshals reached Myles, one pulling out a pair of silver handcuffs. Roland Myles, one marshal said formally, you're under arrest for bribery, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to defraud the United States, and abuse of judicial power. Myles lunged for the papers as if destroying the evidence might erase reality. But the marshals grabbed his arms and pulled him upright, locking the cuffs around his wrists. Get your hands off me, he screamed, his voice cracking. This is political. This is Trump's America. Kash stepped back, arms folded. No, Judge. This is America's justice. In the chaos, Kash remained composed. He gathered his notes and stepped out from the witness stand. The clicking of cameras chasing him down the hallway as stunned senators and staffers watched the once untouchable judge be dragged away in disgrace. Back in the hallway, Caroline Leavitt greeted him with a nod. The president's watching live, she said. He said, and I quote, hell of a job. Finally, someone's cleaning house. Kash gave a rare smile. It's only the beginning. She leaned in. You ready for the fallout? He nodded. Always. Behind them, the chamber doors slammed shut. The first domino had fallen. But Kash knew there were dozens more still standing. And he was coming for them next. By nightfall, the arrest of Judge Roland Myles had become the lead story on every news network in America. Fox News called it the most stunning judiciary takedown in modern history. MSNBC predictably ran with FBI director becomes Trump's personal executioner. The White House press room had gone into overdrive, fielding questions from stunned reporters while President Trump himself posted on Truth Social. Kash Patel, true patriot. Cleaning house just like we promised. No one is above the law. More to come. But inside the Hoover Building FBI headquarters, Kash wasn't celebrating. He was preparing. Sir, said Agent Dana Wilkins, one of his most trusted field operatives, we've intercepted chatter on the back channels. They're furious. Myles was supposed to be untouchable. They? Kash asked, though he already knew the answer. Wilkins nodded grimly. High-ranking bureaucrats. DOJ holdovers. Some in Langley. They've activated fallback protocols. Kash leaned over the secure conference table. On the screen before him were names, powerful names. Judges, ex-ambassadors, senior intelligence officials. For years, they had protected each other, operated in shadows, made decisions behind closed doors that shaped the lives of millions without accountability. The so-called deep state, as the media reluctantly called it, was real, and Kash had dared to turn the lights on. They're going to move against you, Wilkins said, lowering her voice. Probably through the courts, maybe even the Senate. They'll call for an emergency oversight hearing. Try to spin this as a political takedown. Let them try, Kash said coolly. I've got more. Indeed, Judge Myles was just the beginning. Patel's internal task force, formed quietly after his appointment by Trump, had been collecting data for months. Bank records, insider tips. A treasure trove of encrypted communications revealing how layers of bureaucracy had been manipulated for decades to serve elite interests. But Kash knew they wouldn't go down without a fight. The Senate Judiciary Committee, led by Senator Douglas Klein, a longtime critic of President Trump and known sympathizer of establishment forces, issued a subpoena demanding Patel appear before them within 48 hours. Klein appeared on CNN that night, saying, "This is a very serious breach of judicial independence. Mr. Patel's actions resemble those of a banana republic strongman, not a public servant." The media went into frenzy. Protesters gathered outside FBI HQ, waving signs reading "Save Our Courts" and "Dictator Donald's Dog." Inside, the pressure was mounting. Advisors urged Kash to play it safe, to deflect, to appease. But that wasn't how he operated. He walked into the judiciary hearing 2 days later with the same calm stride he'd used when confronting Judge Myles. The cameras were ready. The senators were armed with outrage. And Senator Klein, smug behind his glasses, opened the hearing with venom. "Mr. Patel, are you aware that your reckless arrest of a federal judge has already led to motions being filed to suppress evidence in over 40 active cases?" Kash folded his hands. "With all due respect, Senator, any evidence suppressed as a result of corruption being exposed isn't a loss, it's justice finally correcting itself." The chamber erupted. Klein banged his gavel furiously. "So you admit it? That this was a political crusade orchestrated by President Trump?" Kash didn't flinch. "What I admit, Senator, is that corruption doesn't care if it wears a blue tie or a red one. It just hides behind procedure. And I'm here to rip the mask off." Gasps again. Reporters scribbling. Tweets flying. "Let me be very clear," Kash continued. "I have irrefutable evidence of more than a dozen individuals in high-ranking government roles who have profited off their positions at the expense of American taxpayers." Judge Myles was the first. He won't be the last. Senator Klein leaned forward, trying to intimidate. "And what if you're wrong? What if your crusade ends with innocent reputations destroyed? What if you're dragging the country through chaos for nothing?" Kash's eyes met his. Unwavering. "Then history will judge me. But I'd rather stand on the side of truth and risk criticism than be silent and allow corruption to reign." The room fell silent. Even Klein seemed momentarily stunned. And outside, as protesters chanted and media outlets scrambled for hot takes, ordinary Americans watching from their homes started asking a dangerous question: what if he's right? That evening, Kash Patel addressed the nation. In an unprecedented move, he stood at the FBI's press podium with flags behind him and his task force at his side. "My fellow Americans," he began, "today we exposed the rot." He paused, his tone steady but forceful. "For decades, powerful individuals used your government as a personal piggy bank. They bought judges. They manipulated policy. They silenced whistleblowers. And they thought they could get away with it. Not anymore. The FBI is not a political weapon. It is a shield for the people. And under this administration, we will ensure that shield protects the innocent and exposes the guilty, no matter how powerful they may be." He listed the names of those arrested, gave a detailed summary of charges, promised full transparency in the trials to come. He didn't sugarcoat it. This isn't about parties. It's about power. Corruption doesn't care if you're a Democrat or Republican, it only cares about control. And that ends today. The broadcast went viral. Networks scrambled to respond. Some tried to reframe it as political theater. Others finally admitted this wasn't a stunt, it was a reckoning. But then the blowback began. Senator Douglas Klein and several others filed an emergency motion in federal court to suspend Kash Patel from his duties, alleging abuse of power. A lawsuit followed within hours, claiming Patel had weaponized the bureau under Trump's orders. Anonymous sources leaked classified emails attempting to smear Patel. Old, disproven stories resurfaced in newspapers and blogs. A CNN analyst even accused Patel of treasonous behavior, comparing him to J. Edgar Hoover on steroids. Inside the White House, Trump laughed at the headlines. "They're scared," he said. "They know they're next." But Kash knew better. This wasn't just noise, it was a coordinated effort to stop the movement before it could go further. "Let them come," he told Caroline. "I've got one last card to play. And when it drops, the whole rotten system collapses." She blinked. "You mean the memo?" Kash nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's time." The morning the memo dropped, America stood still. Kash Patel had timed it with surgical precision. At 8 a.m. sharp, the FBI's secure portal released a 95-page declassified memorandum, years in the making, backed by audio recordings, video files, forensic audits, and sworn whistleblower testimony. Its title? Operation Infiltrate, a deep state blueprint. The document laid out in brutal detail how a small but coordinated cabal of bureaucrats, judges, and intelligence officers had manipulated the levers of justice, intelligence, and media to serve their own agenda. At the center of it all? Judge Roland Myles, whose corruption spanned 2 decades and 3 presidential administrations. The memo revealed secret offshore accounts belonging to sitting judges and DOJ attorneys. Classified intel being sold to foreign lobbying firms. The use of nonprofit shells to launder money into judicial election campaigns. Emails from Myles coordinating the silencing of whistleblowers who threatened to expose the network. Worse still, it showed how several former high-ranking officials had used fake national security justifications to block investigations into their allies. The final pages included Patel's chilling conclusion. The American people have been ruled by deception masked as democracy. But the truth cannot be buried forever. It is time to take our republic back. The fallout was instant. Major news networks, even the ones that had spent years dismissing the idea of a deep state, were forced to cover the story. Fox News called it a constitutional earthquake. The New York Times reluctantly published a headline reading, FBI memo confirms coordinated corruption ring in judiciary and intelligence. CNN's Anderson Cooper opened his show with, "Tonight, the memo America can't ignore." Thousands of Americans flooded state capitals demanding accountability. Governors from red and blue states alike called for internal investigations. High schools, churches, universities, everywhere, people were talking about one man, Kash Patel. But not everyone was pleased. Senator Douglas Klein called the memo fabricated hysteria and tried to introduce emergency legislation to limit the FBI director's declassification authority. It didn't work. Within 72 hours of the memo's release, the Department of Justice announced indictments against 12 federal officials, including 3 judges and 2 former intelligence agency directors. By the end of the week, President Trump held a national address. Standing in front of the American flag, he looked into the camera and said, "For too long, good people were punished for telling the truth. Today, under the leadership of Director Kash Patel, that ends. We will never let this happen again. We will restore the rule of law in this country. Not for the elites, but for you, the American people." The final twist came when the Senate tried to impeach Kash Patel. In a desperate move, fearing the power of what they couldn't control, a block of establishment senators launched a last-minute impeachment resolution claiming Kash had compromised the independence of federal institutions. It was a sham, and everyone knew it. The trial was set. The gallery was packed. Millions watched from home. But when Kash took the stand, he didn't defend himself. He went on offense. He walked into the Senate chamber holding one final folder. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said calmly, "before you render your judgment, I would like to submit one last piece of evidence." He opened the folder and slid forward a document. It was a signed confession obtained just 2 days prior from one of the indicted judges, detailing how Senator Douglas Klein himself had accepted bribes to block federal investigations and stall court reform bills. Gasps. Murmurs. The entire chamber froze. Klein turned white. Within hours, Senator Klein was arrested. The impeachment effort collapsed. And Kash Patel? He walked out of that chamber to roaring applause. 1 year later, a statue now stands in front of the FBI headquarters. It reads, "To the American who fought the system and won, Kash Patel, defender of truth." In his first public interview since resigning from the FBI months later, Patel sat down with Caroline Levitt for a special on Real America News. "What do you say to the critics who still think it was all political?" she asked. Patel smiled. "I didn't expose corruption to help a president. I exposed it to save a country." And in living rooms across the nation, from coal towns in West Virginia to the skyline towers of Dallas, people nodded. They had watched one man take on the most powerful hidden empire in America and win. Because sometimes one brave soul with the truth really can change everything.